Welcome, 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 everybody, to another Fearlessly Feral Living podcast. This is Reverend Karen speaking this morning, and I'm going to jump right into the introduction. I'm going to I'm going to mix things up a little bit today, shall we? So, welcome to Fearlessly Feral Living, broadcasting to you from the Woogie Ranch out here in the back 40 of northwestern Nevada, where I'm a half an hour away from the nearest gas station and the nearest grocery store. Our mission here at Fearlessly Feral Living is to provide a strong and unshakable inner foundation that works for successful long-term living. Our purpose is to activate inner self-awareness, and our vision is a world in which everyone lives wild and free. In other words, fearlessly feral. And I want to share with you some stuff that's been going on in my world before I get to today's topic, which is the God's nature is our nature. It's all about the first section in the introduction of the Science of Mind textbook called The Thing Itself. But I wanted to just share some stuff that's going on with you. This podcast that you're seeing or listening to right now, I'm really happy because, at the end of every year, they send me statistics. I get stats and numbers from everything, and I'm kind of a statistics person, which might surprise you because I'm not a numbers person per se. I can do my books and I do my books, but I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. But boy, when it comes to statistics, I really like statistics. I think they speak to us a lot. Anyway, my podcast, Fearlessly for a Living, it grew 68% last year. That means when I started in January 2024, a year ago, 68% more listeners. I'm just pleased as punch with that statistic. I just love it. So I want to thank all of you for listening. I want to thank you for spreading the word. I want to thank you for subscribing. I want to thank you for all of the good, yummy support that you have been giving me this last year. I very much appreciate it. The other thing that I've been doing this last year, and this is still ongoing, is that now when I record my podcast now, I'm simultaneously recording it in video version as well. So those of you who like to see things in video rather than just listen to them, you can find me on YouTube. And my YouTube channel is at Karen Lindsley, MA. So it's a little @ sign, Karen Lindsley, my name, KarenLinsley, no D in there, and the initials MA afterwards, which stands for Master of Arts degree. So sometimes I like to throw that one in there because I'm pretty proud of that degree. And of course, the podcast, you can listen. You know where to listen because you're listening to it right now, unless you're watching on YouTube. But you can listen to the podcast wherever you listen to any other podcast. I've also got my newsletter still ongoing, but now I have a sign up feature on the newsletter where you can sign up. And then in the newsletter, I'll have all the news plus helpful hints and tidbits to live life more successfully. In other words, fearlessly feral. And then on Facebook, I am periodically publishing inspirational words with memes. Now, these memes, I'm pretty proud of these. I've actually been doing these memes for years, like years. And they all consist of my photo. Once in a while, I use an artificial intelligence app called Midjourney, and I will create a graphic, an image to use for a meme. But most of the time, the memes are my photos that I've actually gone out into the world and created. And then there's an inspirational affirmation on the meme as well. On Facebook, when you see these, they all have a QR code on them. That's that little square thing that looks like a bunch of little squigglies that don't mean anything. Actually, they mean a lot. If you're looking at that meme on your phone, you simply save the meme to your photos in your phone. And then when you click and hold on it, the QR code will pop up with a link that you can follow to purchase any of those memes in printed form. I especially like the refrigerator magnets. They're very cool. And the ones you purchase will not have the QR code on them. They'll just be the image and the inspirational saying. So I just wanted to share that with you. Some of the stuff that's going on over here at Fearlessly Feral Living. I am with that statistic of going up by 68%. I'm like, wee-haw, off we go. Let's do this. So now I want to begin my talk today and calm down a little bit after all the excitement of all the news and ask you to take a deep breath and close your eyes. Well, don't close them if you're driving. You're driving while listening, but just take a deep breath and sink into that glorious space where you feel connected with whatever your image and your idea is of God. Just do that. Now imagine, if you will, opening the Science of Mind textbook for the first time. Now, if you've never opened the textbook, you're going to get a little preview. If you have opened it before, then I'm sure you remember some of these quotes that I'm about to give you. This is the very first sentence in that first section called The Thing Itself in the introduction to the Science of Mind textbook. We all look forward to the day when science and religion shall walk hand in hand through the visible to the invisible. Right? Science and religion walking hand in hand. I see it happening today, really. Imagine seeing these words in the textbook. To learn how to think is to learn how to live. Oh my God, how do we learn how to think? Well, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And these words, the very air is vibrant with power. And these words, freedom is the birthright of every living soul. Now, if you're into social justice like I am, you know that a lot of us are not experiencing freedom right now. It's a fact. And I'm not going to address that right now. I'm saying this inner silent affirmation that more freedom is manifested for all of the marginalized folks out there who are not experiencing freedom now. But I'm going to move on. So imagine hearing, by reading this textbook, this first section called The Thing Itself, that our teaching is actually called by Ernest Holmes, the founder, the creator of this teaching. He calls it spiritual psychology. Now, if you've been listening to my podcast for any length of time, you know I love psychology. I'm a shrinky type from the beginning. Hearing that this teaching is a spiritual psychology makes my heart sing. Now imagine, if you will, that being told in this section that all your thoughts are creative, that everything you think creates, manifests as physical reality in your life. Now, if this is your first time hearing this concept, you might be feeling a little bit of like, oh, what, really? A little bit of fear, maybe. A little bit of, oh, I'm not sure I like that. Not sure I believe that. That's okay. I felt fear the first time I actually got this concept. I grew up knowing it. I grew up being told it. But the first time I got it, that it sank into that deep, deep place of conviction and knowingness, yeah, I felt some fear. I felt quite a bit of fear, actually, because it meant I could no longer live the way I was living. But I also got excited, and I had this sense of joyous anticipation, because I knew, along with that no longer living the way that I had been living, I also knew that I had the power to create something new in my life. And last but certainly not least, imagine reading that divine nature is our essential true nature. Just imagine all that stuff while I move on in my talk here. I hope that, like me, at hearing these words, you are experiencing gratitude and excitement and enthusiasm, and maybe just a tiny bit of apprehension at the vastness of our power that is possible if we can only embrace this teaching and embrace it fully. If we can only move from intellectually thinking that we are a part of God and it is a part of us, and into that heart space of knowing it, that deep inner place of feeling it, and of experiencing that vast and glorious thing called oneness. And right there in the first section in the Science of Mind textbook, we bump up against generations of tradition and teachings that have told us we are separate from God, right? Oh, God can't be a part of you. You got to find out a power greater than yourself. That can't be inside of you. You know, all the stuff, all the stuff. And I'm like, nope, none of that ever, ever, ever made any sense to me. So we've got generations of teaching, and we're getting bombarded with this message from lots of areas that God is separate from us. We hear it in our language. It's taught in Christian churches all over everywhere. It's also taught in other faith traditions. And yet, that's not the original teaching. It's been distorted. The original teaching is that God's nature is our nature. The original teaching is that we are one with God and it is one with us. The original teaching is that we have all the power that God has. And I can understand why this might be difficult to embrace and difficult to learn and difficult to fully embody, because we've been bombarded with so many of those messages. I had no such qualms. I was lucky. I didn't get indoctrinated with that message growing up. And when I started hearing it more and more and more as an adult, I knew that no, that message that God is separate from me was not for me ever on any level. I knew this. I knew it. It's getting brighter outside. I got to turn my lights up. The sun's coming up. I was up really early this morning because I did this talk, this very talk. I did it earlier, an hour ago, in Concordia Center for Spiritual Living, Rhode Island. I gave the talk virtually, Eastern time. They're on Eastern time, so I was up at dark 30 this morning, and I knew I wanted to record this podcast for you today. And I thought to myself, you know, Karen, while you're still awake, you might want to get to it now because later you're going to have a nap. So anyway, I understand why this teaching might be so difficult to embrace and learn. And yeah, I didn't have those kinds of qualms. I grew up around this teaching. I grew up hearing about it. I grew up not living it because honestly, my parents got divorced when I was 3, and my mom was an atheist who taught me fierce independence. In fact, what she said was, Karen, you can't rely on anyone for anybody, especially God. If you want it done, you got to do it yourself. And I'm like, okay, fine. And then I'd go visit my dad, and he'd say things like, God is within you and your thoughts have power. And I'm like, okay, fine. Was a little confused growing up. That confusion took me on a little path for a while, but eventually I found my way back. And I found my way back because of those little zingers, those little seeds that my dad would plant along the way. He also, when I was in my teens, gave me a book because I was asking him questions about all this stuff he was telling me. And he had to go, he had to go a lot. He was always on the road playing trumpet. He had to go a lot. And he gave me this book. The book was called The Three Magic Words by U.S. Anderson. And, you know, in this movement, we have go-to books that we read all the time that, you know, everybody's floating their books around. Did you read this book? Did you read that book? You know, books like Neil Donald Walsh and Brene Brown and Eckhart Tolle, all those people that write these lovely, yummy books that we love to read so much. Well, I think this book was one of those back then. It was early, it was in the 1960s. And my father said, I want you to read the entire book. The three magic words are at the back of the book, but you can't go back there and cheat and look up the three magic words. I want you to read the whole book. Well, I was a teenager. I had places to go and people to see and things to do. And they didn't include reading a book. So, of course, I cheated. I went to the back of the book. And you know what those three magic words were? I am God. I'll say it again. I am God. Now, did you get a little bit of queasy feeling in your stomach hearing those words? Did you get a little like, oh my God, what is this woman talking about? Really? I got to go. A little bit of that? Did you get a little resistance to that? I'm not surprised because we've been indoctrinated with this message that God is separate from us. And not only that, it's blasphemous and arrogant to think that we could be God. Yep. Yep. I get it. I don't agree with it, but I get it. But just let it sink in for a little bit. And I'm going to share with you that the message that is taught today that God is separate from us, Jesus didn't teach that. Jesus told us we were gods. He came right out and said it in the Bible. And I can't believe I'm going to quote the Bible here, but I am. In John chapter 10, verses 34 through 36. Have I not said you are gods? He came right out and said it. He said it in many other places in the Bible as well. He said this. It's not the only place, nor the only time in a religion and a faith tradition much, much older than Jesus, Hinduism. They said Atman is Brahman, which means the self is the supreme reality. We're connected with God. In Buddhism, which is also a lot older than Jesus, sutras that teach that all sentient beings have the potential to attain Buddhahood. Now, that potential is key for us because while we're fighting our childhood indoctrination that God is separate from us and there's no way on earth, no way, no how we could ever be anything resembling God, Buddhism says we have the potential to indeed be that. In Islamic mysticism, Sufism, the essence of God permeates all creation, they said. And the best way I know to illustrate that is from a Sufi poet. You might be familiar with him. His name was Rumi. And he said, you are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. So there we have some good concrete evidence from other faith traditions that this concept I'm laying out for you here, God's nature is our nature, is true, and it has been taught to us over thousands of years. It's only been recently in a modern day bastardized version of Christianity that they've taught anything else. The resistance to it is very, very powerful. And not just from folks who are traveling another path. I encounter people in this movement who almost daily think and refer to and talk about a God separate from them. And I'll just say this, you won't ever hear me speak unless I'm trying to explain concepts like this. You'll never hear me refer to God in the third person. And if you miss grammar class in school, that means you won't hear me refer to God as something out there separate from me. I will never say, well, God wants this, or God did that, or God willing and the creek don't rise. I don't say stuff like that because that always implies an outer God to me. I'm a part of God. It is a part of me. And I'm not going to limit myself by by talking about it as if it's separate from me. What I want to share with you is that when we embrace the concept that we are one with God, that there is no separation, that divinity is our very nature, that we are each unique and individualized manifestations of spirit, freedom, peace, power, and joy will be ours. All we have to do is embrace this one concept. So yeah, that's the first part of this section in the textbook called The Thing Itself. In a nutshell, God's nature is our nature. But there's more. There's more in this section. The other part of this first section deals with our thinking. Remember, Ernest Holmes said in this part, to learn how to think is to learn how to live. Wow, to learn how to think. How do we learn how to think? How do you know you don't already know how to think? Well, I've got some ideas. You might already know how to think, but I'm going to jump in here and talk to some other things. We have this spiritual practice called personal self-awareness. Now, I have spoken with people in this movement, other ministers who have told me they do not believe that personal self-awareness is a spiritual practice. I disagree with that. I think it is a spiritual practice. It is up there with renewing my connection, remembering who and what I am, that God's nature is my nature. Personal self-awareness is running neck and neck for my number one favorite and most done spiritual practice with connection with oneness. Because we can't have a passive relationship with our thoughts. We have to know what we are thinking and feeling at any time of day. We have to be able to actively access that knowledge at any time. And then we have to be able to ascertain whether or not our thinking or our feelings or our beliefs are limiting us or enlarging us. And if the ways that we are thinking, the patterns of our thinking are limiting us, then we get to change those thoughts and keep them changed. And that's what it means by learning how to think. We are aware of our thoughts. We know if they're serving us well, and if they are not serving us well, we change them. That's what learning how to think means. I'm not sure why we never taught that self-awareness was a spiritual practice, but we're teaching it now. We have a class called Spiritual Principles and Practices, and self-awareness is in there. And there's all different kinds of ways to teach, to get self-awareness and to learn what you're thinking and feeling. I do a self-awareness practice every single day. It's pretty much my default now. My default used to be total and complete shutdown. I couldn't feel anything. Well, I could feel one thing. I could feel anger. That was pretty much all I felt many, many years ago. Talk about change your thinking. In times of stress or fear, I go back to that old default of being shut down. But today, because of the spiritual practices I've been doing for so many years, I can usually become aware of it sooner rather than later and then get back in touch again so that I'm in an active relationship, not a passive one, with what I'm thinking and feeling. So we've got this thing, this stuff that is, this ultimate stuff, this invisible essence, this divine nature that's a part of us. And then we've got our thinking. And guess what? These two things hang out in our consciousness and they have conversations with one another. And from that, they create. That's where we get the power from. Because we are one with God, because God's nature is our nature, we have within us all the power of God. We also have the intellect of our thinking. And those two get together and they come up with ideas and thoughts and patterns of thinking, because it's not a thought that changes our life. It's a pattern of thinking that changes our life. And when we have a pattern of thinking, we have this law that always says yes. And that's how we create. When I teach this in classes or workshops, I say thought plus feeling equals power. And I'll say that again. Thought plus feeling equals power. And yeah, we've got that power in spades because we're each unique and individualized manifestations of spirit. But we have to feel that. We have to know that. We have to embrace that. So I have a couple little invitations for you. The first one is to facilitate your moving into this concept of oneness, this concept that, yes, God's nature is my nature. So if you haven't heard this before, there's attributes of spirit. If you've been around for a while, you've probably heard these. But attributes of spirit are things like love, joy, peace, power, all the things that we use to describe God. Those are attributes of spirit. My suggestion, my invitation for you is to pick one attribute every day in your morning spiritual practice or whenever you do spiritual practice. Pick one and set an intention to embody that attribute of spirit for the rest of the day. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like. I once spent several months every day setting an intention for compassion because I felt like I needed some additional work in that area. The truth was I wasn't being very kind to myself. And because I wasn't being very kind to myself, I wasn't being very kind to others. Because the law of attraction says that how we treat others is how we treat ourselves. Actually, I got that backwards. How we treat ourselves is how we treat others. In other words, I can't have compassion for others unless I first have compassion for myself. That's the law of attraction. Our teaching says it all begins within us. It starts here inwardly with ourselves. That's what that means. And so we've got to go within. So I decided I was going to embody compassion. And then we have that law that always says yes to our intentions because we got oneness and we've got thinking and we combine them and poof, it's like magic sometimes. Only it's not magic, it's a law. The law says yes. And I got all these opportunities to embody compassion, and I learned how to feel compassionate for myself and others. I learned to change the ways I spoke to myself. I learned to recognize when I was not speaking so kindly to myself. I learned to be a kinder, gentler person, and that was the whole reason why I wanted to embody compassion. So give it a try. This practice works. So that's the spiritual practice for more embodying oneness in your life. Now we go on to our thinking. So our work at any point in our spiritual journey is to recognize the connection between our current life experience and how we've been co-creating it. Not with blame or shame, guys. Quit that. I know where you're going to go with that. Oh, I was thinking this and I created that. Shame on me. I'm such a bad person. I'm so guilty. No. Please take the word shame and blame out of your vocabulary. Take this question out of your vocabulary. If I created this in my life, what's wrong with me? What was I thinking? Don't do that. It's the patterns of our thoughts. And it goes a bit deeper than that. It's our beliefs. And again, if we're not aware of what our beliefs are, yeah, they're going to create shit in our lives. But we're not to blame for that. We're not bad people for that. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We have those beliefs in place for a reason. It's because at one point they served us really well. It's just that we grow We have a spiritual journey. We grow, we improve, we get through life. And all of a sudden, those old beliefs aren't serving us so well anymore. So we get to, with this practice of having an active relationship with our thinking and our thoughts and our feelings, we get to the level of belief and change all of that stuff so that we can change our lives. That's what happens. And that change can only come from awareness, from doing a practice of personal self-awareness. We have these thoughts, we have these feelings. They might not feel so good sometimes. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The point is that we fully embrace the power of our mind and our thinking and our thoughts and our beliefs, because only when we can embrace them can we release them if necessary. What we resist persists. When we have a passive relationship with our thinking, in other words, we're just going with the flow, that our thoughts are not intentional, what happens is life happens to us and we're just a bundle of reactions to what has happened. We're victims. What we need to remember is that if we can pause when stuff happens and move into response instead of reaction, because now we know a little bit about what we're thinking and feeling at any given time, then we can stay present to what's happening and we can act with integrity. We can act in consistency with our own values and belief systems. This is a good way to live, guys. And when we do that, then we move into intentional co-creation. So the call to action, your invitation here today, is to not only embody a quality of spirit, but to also form an active relationship with our thinking, to be aware of our thoughts at any given time of the day, and to be able to change those thoughts if necessary, without judgment or condemnation or blame or shame, but instead with compassion and love and acceptance. And to do that, you need a personal self-awareness practice. To me, it's as important as drinking water. I do this practice every single day, and I have for many, many years, almost 40 years. I also do my practice to connect with the God of my understanding every single day. I'm telling you guys, living like that is a wonderful way to live. So to conclude, this section in the Science of Mind textbook called The Thing Itself, it's within the introduction. It's before all the chapters start, called The Thing Itself. If you take it a little bit at a time and read one section at a time, it's easily assimilated. And this is what it says: we are one with God. We each have the same power that God has. And we access that power by and through our thoughts. And we can know and feel our oneness, and we can know and become aware of our thoughts by consistently doing spiritual practices. Another thing Ernest Holmes said in that chapter was that sometimes we indulge in too much theory and too little practice. So take the theories that I have given you here and test them. Do the practices and see what happens. I'd love to hear what results for you. So that's the end for today's podcast. I am knowing Fearlessly Feral Living for me and for you. And Fearlessly Feral Living is a focused ministry of centers for spiritual living. And all that stuff that I'm doing to carry this wonderful message, your support is so appreciated. You give your support by listening. You give your support by watching. You give your support by commenting to my messages on Facebook. You give your support by signing up for my newsletter. The links in the show notes. You give your support by subscribing to my YouTube channel. You can also give your support financially, and believe me when I tell you that is also so much appreciated. From my heart to yours, I thank you for all of that. And so we are at an end. And again, I am knowing fearlessly feral living for me and for you. Thank you.